Hey everybody, today we are going to discuss the bump map and normal mapping process. And bump map and normal maps are pretty cool. They actually cause the illusion of tactile texture on your model. So I've gone ahead and created this scene. As you can see, it's just a simple polygon plane. I kept it a square, therefore we don't really have to do too many UVs. This is a seamless plane, so we could repeat this multiple ways. But I've gone ahead and applied a blend shader and a color map to this. Now you should already know how to apply color maps and understand the UV process before you begin this lesson. And what we see here is it's pretty nice, but overall we could have more of a depth and a bump feel to it, because you can see when we go and render it here in Maya, it looks pretty flat. We're getting the nice colors that we want to achieve, but we're not getting the depth that we want to achieve. Now we can do this two different ways. In our file, we have a bump mapping node. Most shaders come with this bump mapping node, and we're going to look at two different types of bump mapping, and we're going to see how we can create them in various different ways. So we're going to look at bump mapping and then something called normal mapping. So let's go over to Photoshop and look at our color texture. You can see it's pretty easy, pretty simple, just some grays and blues and blacks and so forth. But what we want to do for this is to create a simple 2D bump map. Now to do that, what we'll need to do is we'll need to make this a desaturated image. So I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer to this image. And we'll go to, let's pick hue and saturation, and let's turn down our saturation. Let's open this up so you can see the whole menu, and turn down the saturation and make it completely black and white and gray. So if we turned up saturation, that would make it pop and really look blue, which is actually not a bad effect. But what we want for a bump map or a 2D bump map is the illusion of height in the Y and X axis. So by doing that, we're going to use all 255 shades or tones or values, whichever you want to call them, within this image to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as, and we're going to save it as a JPEG, and we're going to call this bump 2D. And I'm going to hit save, hit OK, and now we have the ability to take this 2D bump and to apply this 2D bump to the image. So what we're going to do is go to the Maya interface, go back to our shader, go to bump mapping, click the checkerboard box, click the File tab, and go ahead and hit the square here, actually the square on top, I always get them wrong, and that will take us to our empty file node. Now in this, where we had the color map in the color file, we want to put this new bump map we just saved, the black and white version, in the bump. And immediately you'll start seeing some pretty cool things. Now you can see that it attempts to try to raise it. Now I always typically like to turn off my filter, and I'm just going to adjust here just slightly, the up and down, and we'll do that there. So you can see if we go in the negative values, it actually gives it quite a nice look there as well. It gives us the illusion of depth. Now what's happening is it's still a flat plane, but when we render it's going to look way different here. You can see we're starting to get that tactile feel. Now this gives us the illusion of depth within the X and Y axis. So this is something that's going to give us a pretty nice illusion, but the problem is it's only in two directions. Now if we were to use a displacement map, we could actually displace the geometry to look extruded, or to actually be extruded. Right now we're just using this as a bump. What normal maps do is actually they act as 3D bump maps, where grayscale bump maps are in X and Y. The 3D bump maps or normal maps are in X, Y, and Z, and they actually react to lighting quite well. And to create a normal map, you can do multiple things. We can actually use this image right here. Unfortunately, there's not any sort of quick filter that we can use, and it really depends on your program that you're using to achieve this. So some of the programs I like to use, let's go to our internet here. I like to use a free program called Crazy Bump. It's rather nice. Give it a second. Crazy Bump is free for Mac and PC. The other one I like to use is XNormal, which we'll be using today. XNormal is, I believe, currently only a PC-only program. And you can see, as soon as you do that, you can see a lot of different tutorials coming up and whatnot, which is rather helpful. Let's go ahead and convert this to a normal map from a bump map. Now, normal maps and bump maps look visually different. I'm going to take the 2D node, and I have XNormal right here, which I'm going to double-click and open. It's a very basic interface. And when XNormal opens, I'm actually going to go to the Tools palette. Now, if you have a Mac computer, you're going to be using something called Crazy Bump. Today, we're using XNormal. It will get you the same result. So we're going to go to our Tools button, and here we get a various amount of options of which we can do. We can use a photo and convert it to a normal. We can use a height map and convert it to a normal. It's really up to you. So let's go to Photo. Let's treat this as a photograph. And you can see we get all sorts of options. Now, what they want in the photo option is you to have various lighting to react to the different X, Y, and Z spaces. This can get a little overwhelming for some people. Now, you can just load 4 of the same picture and it works fine. What I tend to do if I'm converting a bump map to a normal map is I tend to load the height map to normal map setting, which is this very first box here. This usually works pretty well. If I right click in this box and say Browse Height Map, and I navigate to that bump 2D, what you can see is there it is. So pretty nice. You can see it's 1024 by 1024. And to convert it, I can go ahead and right click and say Generate. And what happens is it converts this image for me. And that's very nice. It will actually does it rather quickly. To save, I just right click again, save normal map, and we'll call this normal map. We're going to save it straight to our desktop, and we can make it any setting we want. You can use anything from a BMP to a DDS. We'll go with JPEG just to keep everything consistent. And it's saying this file does not exist. Should I create it? Yes, we should. It thanks me. It's very polite. And now I can hit the little X on the left side, and now I should have a normal map. Well, let's see what this looks like. This normal map is a purple file, where our bump map was more of a gray file. So there is definitely a visual difference, so you should be able to tell a 2D bump map versus the 3D normal map. And fortunately, they work almost the same way in Maya. So I'm going to go back to my file, and I'm going to replace the black and white version with that normal map JPEG that we just saved. So we'll double click and go to normal map. And there's one more step that we have to do. Normal maps won't look great right away in Maya, but I need to make sure they're set to be treated as a normal map and not a bump. So in the bump node, I'm going to make sure I can use my little in and out buttons if need be until I find it. So you keep hitting them, then eventually you should find your little bump map node. There it is. And I can change this to tangent space normals. Now, object space normals will tend to have less purple and more reds and greens, and that's how you tell them apart visually. But tangent space normals, as soon as I do that, you guys may notice immediately kind of a shift. And what happens is it doesn't look that intense as of yet, but what I can do is I can create a light, point light, hit 7 on my keyboard and raise it. And what will happen is it will actually give it the illusion of depth. And so, again, we can go ahead and click in here and play around a little bit more. So we can play with these settings. If you want to intensify your normal map, a good trick is to open it back up into Photoshop. So let's do that. There we go. I hit Control or Command J and I usually set this to overlay, and that will actually brighten it up a little bit. So that's a little trick from kind of the pros use this one just to kind of bump it up. And so at this point I can do a quick save as. I can revamp, save right over it. And if it's not as intense as you'd like it in Maya, by doing this and reloading your file, it will just pop it just slightly. And it's going to be ever so subtle. Now remember, what you see in this viewport is not what you're going to see when you render. When you render, we can actually see we are getting that height information that we're looking for. The better or different renderers we use, the different types of renders we're going to achieve. So you can see here I'm using the mental ray renderer, and it's giving me a more realistic feel to it. It actually has a bit of depth into it. So again, this changes depending on your engine. If you're using a real-time engine such as Unity, it's going to look slightly different. You're going to need to make those adjustments in that particular engine. But overall, it's giving me a nice result. I could combine this with a specular map, a color map, and get some really cool realistic results within our program. Now, that's just one of many ways to make a bump out of a 2D image. What we can do is we can actually make bumps and normal maps out of geometry as well. So this process is called baking. And to bake a normal map, what we typically do is have a low poly and a high poly object. And what that means is we would go ahead and model an object with all of this little detail. Maybe we actually model each one of these different cylinders here as real geometry rather than texture. And then we would bake that as a texture in a smaller area. Now, there are programs out there that will do or help us with this, one of which is Mudbox. So Mudbox, if I go ahead and open Mudbox 2016, let me go ahead and shut down Maya for now. I don't want to overwhelm my computer. Give it a second here to shut down while Mudbox boots up. Mudbox is very close to the program ZBrush, for those of you who are familiar with that. And here what we can do is we can actually create normal maps through this program. So if I grab the plane here and I go ahead and maybe use a stencil, I can go in Sculpt, I can do a lot of different things. I'm going to use my Sculpt tool here. And there we go. That looks good. Let's go ahead, and one of my favorite tools is the stencil tool. Actually, you know what? We're going to stamp this. We're going to use our imprint tool. And imprint tool is kind of fun. All right, so what I can do is actually add divisions. So I'm hitting Shift D on my keyboard, and I'm adding density to my model. And the more divisions I have, you can see the more detail I can get out of these brushes. So when I start, it's actually a very low division, but by adding more divisions, right now I have hundreds of thousands of divisions, I can go ahead and imprint, for instance, this is brick, I can imprint brick to this file. So let's go ahead and let's try to do that. Let's isolate it to top mode. And let's do a brick. Give it a second here to kind of catch up. There we go. So we can see we added geometry. And what Mudbox will actually do, pending that your model is UV laid out and it's all ready to go, we can actually do UV and maps and extract this texture as a normal map. And what it will do is extract the highest subdivision, which I did 7 levels of subdivision, to the lowest subdivision. And more importantly, if I just simply go and name it, I'll call it norm MUD for Mudbox. And let's make sure we throw that on our desktop so we can find it easy. Hit save. Actually, we'll call it norm mud in here. There we go. And if I go ahead and hit the extract button, and it does all the work for me, in a matter of a few seconds, I now have a brick-like normal map, which is a pretty quick process. I can go ahead and apply that. I can apply it to other objects. And where this program really becomes pretty fascinating is when you can actually take your own 3D models into the program. So for instance, if I wanted to, let's go ahead and open a new scene, and I want to import a model, I could do a file, let's say import, and we can look for perhaps this shield that I've been using, and I can open up this shield, and now this shield is here, and you can see I have all the different pieces ready to go, and they're the polygon count that I currently used, and I built this shield to be subdivided. So what I can actually do is, because it's UV'd out, you go to the UV view, you can see the UVs are laid out. I can actually hold Shift D, and I can start adding subdivisions to this piece alone. And it becomes really, really amazing what we can do now. Because now, if I really want to go and paint dents and dings inside this shield, I can even create a new sculpt layer. And I can go ahead and go to sculpt, and I can click, and for instance, I have just that random scratch brush, but I could add scratches. So like it was in war, I can change the strength of these scratches. So it depends on the scale of your object. If I hold the control key down, it will actually invert those. And so I can add different areas. In addition, I can even add paint layers to this piece. So if I create a new paint layer, I can actually add a bump or normal map paint layer. So if I added, let's go ahead and go and add that normal map. If I add that, I can go in and use the paint tools in Substance, and I can paint bumpiness. So right now I'm kind of using this middle tone color, but if I go and turn this color to black and I paint with, let's use some sort of brush image, that same brush, that will paint bumpiness that way. And so if we go white, we'll get some raising in it. You can see it's starting to raise the areas. And overall, we're getting some cool effects. So let me go to my object list and turn this off, where you can see all the damage I'm starting to paint on. Now, I did this really messily, but I can paint, I can do bumps, and the great thing is it's all layered. So if I hate this normal map, I simply highlight it. I'm going to hit the, I'm going to delete my layer by delete selected, and there we go. If I go to my sculpt layer and I feel like I've done it too strong and I want it more subtle, I can go to strength and just gently pull it down. This is a really awesome tool. And the best part about it is, again, as I mentioned, we can paint, we can do all sorts of things. If we want to paint this to be maybe like a brown color instead of this golden yellow, we can go in here and just kind of start painting. I tend to use kind of a random brush, and I kind of play around with it a little bit. You can play with your opacity, you can play with the fill and all sorts of things. If you just kind of hover over certain areas, they'll tell you which is what. And, you know, just kind of going in, and we can kind of start building up our scene. So I can actually turn this down, make it kind of see-through, believe it or not, and then that original shader will come through. So I can continue to add layers in here. So if I add to this diffuse layer and I want a darker color, I can go and add on top of it. And this is a really great painting technique to kind of build your painting colors. And when I'm done, I can right click and I can say export this to a PSD. I could go, and if I want to deal with just the sculpting, let's turn the little eyeball off here, I can actually export these sculpt layers. But for that, what I would do is go to Maps and UVs, extract texture maps, go to normal map, and what I can do is I can kind of do an add all here, and I can add the lowest level, I can add the highest level, I can name them norm. So I'll make sure, again, I always do that a little backwards, but norm, shield, hit save, hit extract, let it run through. Super quick process. Let's see what we get. Ladies and gentlemen, look at that. Now we have a normal map shield layer that we need. Now occasionally you may need to flip values in here, and when that happens to you individually, I'll be around. You can kind of hit me up with a question and I can help you with that. But you can see creating normal maps is really easy, and even using these programs to help you start building your color maps is pretty easy as well. So again, this is a really bad color map, but let's kind of clean this up a little bit. And we'll go in here and kind of just paint. You can even use your orthographic views to kind of tie it down a little bit. I like to do that. And let's add another layer, and let's make this a specular map. Hit OK. So for specularity, I can start painting in areas that are shiny. So maybe I want this area in the middle to be shiny. So you can see when I rotate, just that area is super shiny now. And when I'm done with these, I can simply go and, again, you can see the addition of the normal map. But if I want to save these maps, I can do export channel. I can save that. By doing that, if I do export channel to PSD, I can kind of get myself working in that. I can also, again, do a extraction operation, and I can transfer the paint layers this way. So this will take one model and put it to another. So you could do something like that. It's actually a really cool technique. So needless to say, it's something that, here we go, export selected. That's what I was looking for. It's something that really speeds up and makes the texturing process more fun. So if I call this spec layer, I know we're talking about normal maps, but what it will do is actually output, if I can find it, always check where you save it. That's a PNG. There it is. It's just not updated on my desktop just yet. Now we have a specular map for that. So again, there's no reason why you can't create these dynamic maps within Maya, Mudbox, XNormal, and even Substance Painter. So let's look a little bit into Substance Painter with this shield as well. So let's go ahead and open, I'm going to search for Substance Painter. If you've looked at my color map video, you've seen me kind of explore this already. And what I'm going to do is create a normal map for this shield. So open this up. We don't want to update just yet. And we're going to do File, New, Select, Shield. Everything else looks good. We're going to go ahead and make it for Unity 5 because that's what we're going to be using. And we're going to do OpenGL mode and hit OK. Here's our awesome shield. Now in this case, we don't have the geometry, so we're not sculpting, but what we can do is actually paint with normal maps. So if I, for instance, create this layer and I scroll down in the layer, I can paint with the color, the height, the roughness, the metallic, or the normal, or I can turn those all off. I can just paint with a normal map, and I can use these tools. We'll just use this plus. I'll use my bracket key here, where we can just start painting with these. And it becomes a really nice kind of workflow to kind of paint on a surface. So again, we have all these little areas, and give me a second. Let me actually do a height map too. That will help. I'm going to do a new layer here. And actually, let me delete this. Perfect. And let's do a new layer. And let's paint with our brush. That looks good. Let's try the color. There we go. And let's see if we can't get that normal to look like it's popping in. It doesn't seem to be showing up, so let's play with the height. Ah, there we go. Check that out. So I'm dealing more with the height map, and I could put symbols where I want. I could change this height map. I could put it negative so it looks like it's being punched in. This is the ugliest shield ever at this point, but hopefully you guys get the point. So I'm dealing with that height map to eventually create a normal map that I can export. So if I cycle through all my maps, you can see that these normal maps have been painted in, and it actually is going to allow us a little more control when we export this. There's a great example of the normal map in which we can work with it. Now, if you hit C on your keyboard, you can cycle through those. The letter M will get you back to what you have. So I can go and paint in color or normal and height and get just those bumpiness textures. Or again, I can add color to it. So it's a cool appearance. And let me reset this and show you really what we can do. In our color map video, and we'll do add this shield again. In our color map video, we did some really awesome things with Substance Painter. But what I can actually do is I'm going to go to Bake Textures. I'm going to just bake everything. Is I can actually apply a lot of different elements to this shield. So you saw at the very end of the video, I had the ambient occlusion baked. I had all sorts of stuff. So now that I have this baked out, what I can start doing is kind of playing a little bit more with the normal map creation. So I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this folder Wood. And let me undo that backslash there. That was bad. And I'm going to put a fill layer. Actually, rather than a fill layer, let's go and grab a wooden shader. So I'm going to type the word wood. I love this search ability, and there's a walnut wood I really like, so I'm going to throw that in. Give that a second. That gives me, and we don't really need this layer right here just yet. That gives me a pretty good basic starting point. Let's do another shader. And the great thing about these come with bumps. So if we really look, there is a slight bumpiness to this wood. I can even select the folder here and play with different items, whether it be the fibers, whether it be the different levels or the noise of I can play with the base color, so I can play with the height on that base. I can go to each one of these and play with their specific heights and kind of see what appearance this gives me in the final kind of option. So again, play around with these. You can see that kind of changed it a little bit more, made it a little more rough looking, and we can do some amazing stuff with them. So overall, let's go ahead and add a gold. So we'll do a golden armor in this one. And we will do a black mask. We will click our selective UV, and we'll click on here to make that golden. So pretty nice. We're getting some pretty kind of cool effects again. And maybe we'll add that to be gold. Maybe we'll add the handle as well. So you can start seeing we're adding a lot more dynamic nature to these. It's a real fun process when you get to it, just mainly because you can do so many things in this program. For instance, again, let me add a new fill layer here. We can go and continue to build off of one another, and we can build these materials to really work any way we wish. So we can add, a material that just has height information, and we can get one of our alphas or our brushes, and we could add a paint layer to that and paint height in there. Or we could add even our ambient occlusion. So if I do AB here for ambient occlusion, I can even add this to my layer. So let's go and do a add fill to a fill layer. Sounds funny, I know. But I'm going to drag this ambient occlusion map as my color, and look how much it pops. So let's do a whole folder of this, and let's see what we can get. And we'll call this shading. So what I'm trying to get to with you guys is basically to let you know and to let you understand all you can do. We can even bake lights in this program. So if I put the light baking on, this is an awesome material. It actually allows me to kind of bake lights a little bit. That's pretty neat. you can add materials such as generators. And let's see, let's go to the generator and let's add maybe the mask editor. We're going to turn some of these off. And that will give us these really cool kind of worn edges. Just really experiment and play with the generator itself. And I really like this. I'll bring back that gold in a second, but what I really like to do with these elements is just get that illusion of shading. And that saves me hours of work. So if I go ahead and set this to pass through, and I go through and set some of these to, for instance, multiply, and maybe we'll set this one to overlay, we start getting that material. And this starts even becoming a little bit more like almost like a Blizzard hand-painted Overwatch kind of feel to it. But what we can do is go through and continue to adjust that light color. You know, we can set up dynamic lighting. We can set up that light to react to the normal map and to the shading here in Maya. We can set all sorts of things to really, really get us this cool feeling. And we can do all sorts of different settings. We can, here, I'm just going to kind of goof around and just kind of change every button just so you all can see what actually we can make. So I want you guys to go ahead and do that. And just remember, when you're completely done with this, there's a lot of, more things you can do in Photoshop itself. So, don't be afraid to experiment like this, to add to it, to continue to paint. And when we export this, let's do right click, export textures. And this time I'm going to turn on no padding there. And I'm going to get all of these things, including that normal map. So let's look at it. Let's hit export real quick. And no one says that you can't take this file into Photoshop now. And if you look very closely, I have that wooden texture. And it was really easy to make. I also have my color map with some shading baked in. So that's a good start point. I can take that into Photoshop. I even have my specular map pre-built. And the specular is just more of a gray because we didn't have a lot of shininess going on in the scene. Overall, I just want to show you guys all the different ways that you can create normal maps. This is just only a few. There's even more advanced ways that you can take models in Maya, but we'll save that for another lesson. Hope you really enjoyed the lesson here, and look forward to seeing all your normal and bump maps.